Her name was Kristi. She was an incredibly sweet little girl, always smiling, always happy, always trying incredibly hard to fit in, desperately reaching out, hoping someone, anyone, would be her friend. She was also the kid who didn't bathe regularly, who struggled in school, whose clothes never matched, whose hair was never brushed, who always seemed to get food on her face and her clothes when she ate. And I'm ashamed to admit that I really didn't like her. I was 8 years old in the second grade when I met Kristi. We were both in Mr. Board's class. I was fairly popular and was considered the smart girl, and Kristi desperately wanted to be my friend. She would ask me for help on a pretty regular basis because I would finish my work early, and it always took her much longer. I wish I could say that I graciously extended my help, but in all honesty, I pretty much gave as little as possible. I didn't really want much to do with her. She kind of annoyed me. And I wasn't overly mean or nasty. I just avoided her as much as I could. I'd go in the opposite direction if I saw her coming my way, or come up with some reason to extricate myself from a conversation with her. When she'd ask for help, I would offer up the absolute bare minimum. Bullying wasn't really a word that was used a lot when I was in the second grade, but Kristi was definitely bullied. Kids can be really mean, and some in my class were extremely mean to Kristi. Although I'm not proud of the way that I treated her, I can say that I've never tolerated outright nastiness geared toward anyone, and Kristi was no exception. One day on the playground, some boys were calling her Piggy and making oinking noises and mocking her because she had a slightly upturned nose and still was carrying some baby fat and was visibly dirty that day. Kristi tried to smile and laugh it off, but at the same time, her eyes were filling with tears and her entire face was flushed with embarrassment. The look of sadness and rejection and hurt that she wore was heartbreaking. I will be the first to admit that I was not always kind to Kristi, but I have always despised injustice and downright mean-spirited bullying. I became righteously indignant on her behalf because although I didn't really want to be friends with her, I felt that that was just uncalled for. So I chased these boys down, I tackled the ringleader, and I sat on his chest until he apologized. I may be small, but I am mighty. I got walled for my efforts, which was basically my school's form of recess timeout. You had to sit against the wall and you couldn't do anything for the rest of recess. And I didn't care. In my mind, it was totally worth it. While I was serving my sentence, Kristi came and sat down next to me, even though she wasn't in any trouble. She looked at me and said, "Thank you for always being nice to me and for sticking up for me, Ariel. I know that nobody likes me and nobody wants to be around me. You're the only one who ever helps me. You are my best friend." In that moment, I felt like a huge jerk. I may not have tolerated the outright bullying, but I wasn't much better than my classmates, and I knew it. Kristi's probably one of the most gracious people I've ever met in my entire life. She knew at 8 years old what people thought of her. She knew that they avoided her and talked poorly about her, and yet she endured that bullying with grace and dignity. She continued to smile. She continued to reach out. She continued to work hard and to do her best. She never, ever stooped to the level of the rest of us, not once. And not only that, she saw the best in those very same people who were so unkind to her. Maybe it was because she didn't have a lot of love in her life. I suspect her home life wasn't great. But she extended love to everyone around her. She constantly extolled the love that she so desperately wanted to receive, even to those who didn't deserve it. She was the embodiment of what radical love in action looks like. In our gospel this morning, Jesus is giving instructions, presumably to his disciples and potentially the crowds of people that have followed him. And as he teaches, everything that comes out of his mouth is countercultural and contrary to what those in his presence are expecting to hear. Because he tells the people to love their enemies and to do good to those who hate him, and to bless those who curse him and pray for those who abuse him. This is not the message that a group of oppressed people are wanting or expecting to hear. In a culture that was raised up on the Levitical code, which includes an eye for an eye, this message would have seemed crazy. I mean, where is the equity and the justice in this? Much like I thought the solution to those who were bullying Kristi was a physical confrontation, so would the citizens of ancient Palestine. And that's kind of funny because this isn't a new message for them. They've heard this message in stories before, particularly in the story of Joseph, which was our first lesson. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers and experienced horrible things, all because they were spiteful and petty and jealous. Though through it all, he overcame his trials and his circumstances, and he rose to be the second in command of Egypt. And when his brothers come to him for help during a famine, and he reveals himself to them as their brother, they're terrified that he's going to seek vengeance, which would have been his right and would have been the expectation of the time. But instead, he tells them not to worry or to feel guilty or distressed, because God continued to do amazing things with and through him, and he is not bitter. Amazing, radical love in action. This is the radical love that Jesus is telling the people to live into. He's telling them to love people who hate and hurt them, just like Kristi loved her bullies and those who persecuted her. And Jesus' instructions aren't like mild suggestions. If you feel like it, if it's not too much of a bother, if you really feel like digging deep so that you can be a good person, then, maybe think about doing these things. That is not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is commanding this. You will love. You will do good and bless and pray and turn the other cheek and walk the extra mile and give the shirt off your back. Do to others as you would have done to you. All of those things that Kristi would do without even thinking about it, and I wouldn't. And then Jesus goes on to ask, if we are only kind to those who are like us, to those that we like, then what credit is that to us? Communities and groups back then were very insular and liked it that way. If someone was in, that meant that someone else had to be out. And all the laws and guidelines at the time were structured to maintain this social and cultural status quo. Jews were okay, as long as they were the Jews that were like you. The Romans were tolerated because they were the ones with the majority of power and authority, and so they kind of had to be. Gentiles? Nope. They were totally ostracized and looked down upon by the Jews. We might be oppressed and conquered, but at least we aren't those guys. I don't really think our society is all that much different today. There are still insiders and there are still outsiders, and we still like it that way. Because then there's always someone under us. There's always someone worse than us. There's always someone we can blame or look down on when we don't like what's happening in our life or in our world. By commanding tolerance and acceptance of those who we despise, Jesus was preaching a message of inclusivity and radical love in action that was extremely countercultural. The Reverend David Lowe states that this command is actually a promise. The promise essentially that it doesn't have to be this way, that there is another option, that we can treat others the way we want to be treated, that there is enough, more than enough love and attention and food and worth and honor and time to go around, that no matter how hard you play by the rules of the world, you're still trapped in the death and loss that is part and parcel of this world. But that this world isn't the only one, maybe not even the most real one. And that's the thing. Jesus isn't offering a set of simple rules by which to get by or get ahead in this world, but is inviting us into a whole other world. A world that is not about measuring and counting and weighing and competing and judging and paying back and hating and all the rest, but instead is about love. Love for those who have loved you. Love for those who haven't. Love even for those who have hated you. In ancient Palestine and today, it was and is easy to like and get along with people who are just like you, who look like us, who act like us, who have the same education we have, who have similar employment status, who live in similar neighborhoods and drive similar cars, who have similar mindsets and viewpoints, whose children and youth attend school together and engage in the same activities as ours. Connecting and coexisting with people who are culturally our equals, that's really easy. What is hard is embracing and extending radical love to those who are so unlike us, those who look different or have different beliefs, who speak a different language, to those who are unkind to us, those who annoy us or gossip about us or pick fights with us. Our basic human inclination is to fight back, to lash out and say something cruel and nasty in return, to gossip right back, or to just avoid those people, to do the absolute bare minimum that we can, or just to extricate ourselves from all of the unpleasantness as quickly as possible. But Jesus tells us this just won't work. He tells us not to judge or to condemn, but to forgive and to be generous, to love and to love everyone. I learned this lesson at 8 years old. I learned that everyone deserves radical love and friendship, and that is truly a better way. I realized that even though sometimes someone isn't our best friend, we might be theirs, and there's a responsibility with that. I learned that when you let go of your assumptions about people, then amazing relationships can bloom. From the day that Kristi told me I was her best friend on, I tried harder. I helped her in school when I could. I gave her fashion advice because as an 8-year-old in the 1980s, I was an amazing fashionista. I made my friends include her in our games on the playground, and I made sure that she had a group to sit with at lunch. Unfortunately, a few months after I embraced the love and friendship that Kristi had been offering to me that entire school year, I moved away from that town. And I have no idea what happened to her, but I hope it was good things. No matter where she is or who she became, I will always be grateful to her for teaching me about kindness and radical love in action. So my question for all of you this week is who or whom is or are your Kristi? What individuals or groups of people have you been intolerant or unkind to? Or who have you just ignored? Or who have you slandered or gossiped about? Who have you avoided or teased or made fun of behind their back? It's someone because we all do it. But Jesus tells us that there is another way, a better way. And that way is life-giving and joy-inducing. That way is radical love. I encourage each and every one of you to think about your Kristi or Kristis. It might be an individual, it might be a group of people. And instead of reacting and engaging in a way that you typically would, instead turn the other cheek and walk the extra mile. Make an effort and choose love. Choose radical love, active love, life-changing love made manifest in Christ Jesus. Because that is the love that transforms the world. Amen.